in meeting, and I think we should get started, and that more people will. I'm Peter Witt, based at Denmark, Southern Voices on Adaptation. We have source persons from Canada and Sebastien Duyck from Shell Center for International Environmental Law. I will moderate the call and take the agenda, which in summary is as follows. Presentation of the base of the Talanoa Dialogue and at the UNFCCC, and present input to fit the appropriate feature to introduce the issue. And I guess this will be Marianne presenting this, and then we'll move on to opportunities to engage for civil society and to Talanoa a rights-based perspective. And I hope we will have time at the end for discussion on a lot of the open issues which we are left with, because we all know that the Talanoa Dialogue is a new for the facilitated dialogue and how to increase ambition, but for us who are working with a key focus on promoting cooperation at the community level and in national policy. Is what is the role on for addition in the dialogue and for issues like finance, but we can come back to that. So let me hand over to Anna and for the first slide.
Peter, and thank you for organizing this. As Peter said, I work for CAN International, and I'm heading their work on this year's StepUp campaign, which is primarily focused on enhancing countries' climate ambition. So one of our natural focus points is also the Talanoa Dialogue. So I will print briefly the concept of the Talanoa Dialogue, so the basics really, and what it is and why it matters in the UNFCCC. So the Talanoa Dialogue, as Peter said, it's basically a renaming of the facilitative dialogue, which is a first test for doing a global stocktake of the efforts to reach the goals of the Paris Agreement. So the Talanoa Dialogue, in that sense, is one of the key mechanisms in the Paris Agreement that will help us to increase the ambition, which is primarily, than the NDCs, internationally determined contributions, that they're supposed to revise every 5 years. So the Talanoa Dialogue feeds into that process. It will, in the COP20 decision, it was made clear that the Talanoa Dialogues will happen on the national level, but it will also happen on the domestic and regional level. The governments have basically committed to work with stakeholders on identifying the best way forward for raising climate ambition. Next slide, please.
Yeah. Is it a correct observation that this element of working at the domestic and regional level, that this is a new thing, that's a part of the facilitative dialogue, or is that?
I mean, there were a range of new things, I think, in the COP decision, and one of them is this commitment to do Talanoa as and be done also on the national and regional level.
Mm.
And that is, now that we have the next
Yeah.
slide here, is basically, so it's this Pacific Island tradition, and it's meant to be a forum where people can share ideas, experiences, and all of this has to be done in an inclusive, transparent, and participatory manner. So in that way, you fit quite well with the UN process, but it's new to the UNFCCC, where you would normally only have parties discussing issues, and then you would have observers providing input. But here, the idea is that through story sharing and addressing common problems, you also identify solutions that are for the common good, or for the greater good of the community. So dialogue, obviously, it involves all members of society, so governments and non-state actors and civil society. And it is built around these three questions: where do we want to go, and how do we get there? So, and all related to the goal of the Paris Agreement. How do we stay at 1.5?
Yeah, thank you, Marianne. And I'm a bit in doubt because I can see now I inserted some of the slides which you sent, Sebastien. So we shift to you, or we?
If I remember correctly, then this should be about how you can engage in the timeline, which might fit well.
Yeah, exactly. Be happy to have a few words here, and then we'll go back to Marianne afterwards. But maybe you could put it in presentation mode to make it also easier for everyone.
Yeah, let me try to that if that's better for you.
So, yeah, then it's easier to read the slides. Thanks a lot, Peter. So the dialogue is following a stage approach. This is how the Fijian presidency that is in charge of the dialogue has designed the dialogue. And so you have basically 4 stages. The 3 stages are the so-called technical phase, the one that's the most inclusive actually, and the last one is the political phase. That's the one that's really focused mainly on parties. I will come back to specifically the role of civil society in those different stages just afterwards. But the first stage is the one that's ongoing right now since January and up to the 2nd of April. So we have 3 weeks left for this one. That's when the first initial written inputs can be submitted through an online platform that's really easy to use. And it's important to highlight that those are written input by anyone. So it can be parties, it can be intergovernmental organization, it can be server organization at the UNFCCC, but also anyone from civil society. You don't have to, it's not related to observer status like often the UNFC is focused on. So the first stage. The second stage is going to be a series of dialogue to the April/May climate negotiations in Bonn that will involve 6 parallel working groups with each of the 3 questions that were highlighted by Marianne previously. The dialogue takes place on Sunday, May 6th, and they will involve, each of the dialogues will involve a certain number of parties and of non-party stakeholders. And afterwards, after this, all the stages basically conclude with a report that's prepared by the Fijian. So there will be a way for the Fijian presidency to capture all of the input, the discussion, and try to summarize it to make it able for the executives, basically. After April and May session, we go back to the stage where anyone can send in written input. And the second deadline is October 29th. And then...
Let me just mention, Sebastien, that there's a message in the chat box that some find it difficult to hear you. Can you just speak up or speak closer to the mic?
Okay, I will try to. Let me know if that works better. Yeah. Oops, I have to also pay more attention to the chat. The technical to finish include on October 29th. That's the deadline by which all of the inputs received by agency is going to be summarized into a final report that will be submitted to the parties. And then December, there will be the final political phase of the Talanoa Dialogue. And it's really a moment when parties, governments are supposed to translate what they have exchanged during the Talanoa Dialogue into some kind of political outcomes. So that's the final stage is the one that we cannot really influence much. If we go to the next slide.
I'm so gifted, but I'm not so, yeah, here it comes.
Here, thank you. In addition to these 4 stages, it's good to keep in mind 2 dimensions. The first one, as was highlighted by Marianne, the invitation for anyone, basically, to organize national, regional, or thematic dialogues in parallel to this formal process. So this is a good opportunity for civil society to really contribute and to even take the lead in organizing summits. And that's something that's basically ongoing up to October 29, because by then there will be no more entry point really to feed information into the Talanoa Dialogue. But it's also very important to keep in mind that in September and in October, there are 2 very large or very important events that are going to have a big impact on the Talanoa Dialogue. The first one is the Climate Action Summit, organized in California, that will put a lot of emphasis on basically primarily the role of the private sector, local governments, but also other actors in fighting climate change. And so this will have, we can expect a big impact on how the Talanoa is going to be framed for the second part of the year, because a lot of initiatives are going to be discussed at that very important summit. And the second event is a read of the IPCC report on 1.5 degree in early October. And because Talanoa Dialogue really asks the questions, where are we now, where do we want to go, and how to get there, the IPCC report directly speaks to this. So it will clearly have a big impact also on these later parts of the Talanoa Dialogue. So if we go back to if we go to the next slide, 4 points, 4 moments that civil society can use to provide input to the Talanoa Dialogue. One important one, possibly, is for networks would be to try to feed information, if it's possible, by April 2nd. The reason why this is particularly interesting is that the Talanoa Dialogue is just opening now. There's not so much input yet. So the opportunity for civil society to frame the discussion is greater. Also, in the later part of the year, you can expect that the Global Summit in California, the IPCC Summit, really have a take large share of the narrative being discussed in the context of the Talanoa Dialogue. The second opportunity are those April-May dialogues in Bonn, and then the possibility to provide any written inputs up to October. But all that, it's really important to emphasize that because the Fijian presidency has invited national, regional, thematic dialogues to be organized, there is really a mandate for anyone to take a proactive role, not only to follow the formal process in the middle, but to organize their or contribute to their own events. And so if we go to the next slide, and that's this part of the presentation. First, a key unit is to provide written submissions, and I think we will hear from Marianne how to frame your information. Trying to keep in mind both of the deadlines, April 2nd and October 29th. And decisions might be more powerful, effective as much as possible, not only from one organization, but possibly from networks or coalitions, if they are really clear, concise, and actionable, trying to make very specific points. This is particularly important because Fiji have to synthesize all the information provided. And so the easier we make their work by providing very straight to the information, the higher the chances that they will be able to take the messages we try to submit into their final report. And then Fiji has also highlighted that while there is 3 questions, it's particularly important to really provide information on this third question: how do we get there? What are the leverages for more climate ambition in the short and mid-term. The third opportunity, again, are those dialogues organized in May. It's not exactly clear how the selection process is going to be for those representatives from non-party stakeholders. Those will be business representatives, local government representatives, and civil society representatives. But there will be 30 invitations to be distributed with all of those groups. And finally, the events that are dialogues, national dialogues, regional dialogues that are called to be organized provide really an opportunity for organizations to either try to organize their own events focused on one particular field, for instance, or to work with their governments, for instance, if a national dialogue is envisioned. And we know that some states are working to organize a national Talanoa Dialogue. At this stage, it seems that not so many states yet are really clearly a good understanding of how this can work. So critical role for civil society is just to, at this stage, ask the government to organize a national event that can use this Talanoa methodology and then provide information to the international process. Now back to
Marianne. If this makes sense to carry forward from right?
Yeah. So, I mean, my slides focus in particular on what kind of messages would be useful to carry Talanoa Dialogue. Just trying to. So we've identified, and I mean, this list and the table you see here is not. I mean, it's not a complete list. You can add whatever I was about to say, because as Sebastien also said, really anybody can provide input from civil society. So these are just suggestions to have us all think a little bit about what could key messages be and who could be the messengers. Thinking about the three questions: where are we, where do we want to be, and how do we get there? We found we put them into 4 key messages. That there is a need for highlighting this, the need for increasing ambition and enhancing NDCs, and that is obviously based on the assessment that the contributions, the mitigation contributions we have so far, but also the finance and adaptation work is not enough to ensure climate-safe future. So that's one of the key messages that would be good to bring out. Then it would be important to have key messages on how do we get there. This leads to the action that is happening already on the ground, and highlighting that there are really many opportunities that are already being implemented. So you have an opportunity here to highlight what is happening in your city or in your community or in your country that is climate action, which is not necessarily driven by government, but could be driven by any actor, really. And the next message is maybe a bit more structural in the sense of that focus on the opportunities for action in key sectors. These are quite often linked to the NDCs of countries and to policies that are focused on specific sectors. But here you could, for example, highlight the opportunities that you see in the renewable energy sector, in the transport sector. We thought it is important to highlight the development and economic benefits of action, so that we don't only focus on that this is good for climate, but that we also focus on the other benefits that arise from low carbon development or climate action. These could also be health benefits. these key messages in the submissions, or if you are participating in the Talanoa Dialogue or have discussions with your governments, would be key. To, as Sebastien also said, to deliver a easy and straightforward message where we describe the vision that we see, but also at the same time deliver solutions and highlight what is already being done on the ground. Next slide, please. This slide is a little bit too, it's inspired by, we had a call with the action agenda team from the UNFCCC, and he was very keen on conveying this message that in the submissions we make, it is really important that we convey our own of what a climate safe future is and what a climate resilient society is. So, and just to highlight this to you as well, that even though we are providing a UN process, this is really an opportunity for civil society to bring their voice, bring their perspective, and bring their wishes to how they see the future of their country, their community, or the world in general. Then it's really important that the submissions respond to the 3 Talanoa questions, in particular the third one of how do we get there. And here, I think it's important that we highlight what are contributing in terms of how do we get there. Then there has been a point that even though you can basically submit anything in writing, I mean, you could submit a poem if you want to, it's really important to have our messages supply case studies and data and local stories, so that it should fit in this storytelling theme, but it should also be scientifically sound, and it should be relevant. It should highlight the needs and the gaps and the opportunities for action. There are a few in the civil society community, the Talanoa Dialogue, and how to do submissions. One is a briefing looked by the Friends of the Talanoa Dialogue, which is a loose network of organizations, including CAN. And it provides a briefing on how you can do an input for the Talanoa Dialogue. So there's a link included here that I just wanted to share with you. I think it's over to Seb again on include rights values.
Yeah, over to you.
Thanks, Anna. And so, just wanted to highlight for us to keep in mind who are going to be the voices in this Talanoa Dialogue. Parties are really going to play a critical role. I really hope to see governments use this to better highlight their vision and their experience in seeking ambition. We know there will be a lot of inputs provided from the global climate action agenda, the role basically the private sector and local governments can play, for instance, to also contribute to higher emission, not to higher emission, to higher ambition and to better climate policies. Then we have our role on top of that, the role of the society. And so from that perspective, with partners, we believe it's important for civil society to always keep in mind the fact that a lot of data solutions, experiences are going to be provided by other partners. And a critical message that civil society can bring to the table is contributing to frame how climate ambition is understood actually. So if we go to the next slide, and I have 2 slides on that. The Talanoa Dialogue basically offers the opportunity to have a very comprehensive and inclusive discussion about what climate ambition is, something that doesn't really normally happen at the in the UN process related to climate change. So one of the perspectives that we can bring to the table is the fact that ambition is not just about CO2 emission reduction, but it's on the more quantitative dimension. But it's also about how ambition contributes to other of social development. And so building on what Marianne highlighted in the last line of the table that she has shown us, listing themes addressed through civil society input to the Talanoa Dialogue to make sure that at the end of the year, when we understand, when I've spent a full year discussing climate ambition, we don't only think about the actors that can help us increase more rapidly the mitigations, but also what are the roles that human rights or gender equality, land tenure rights, just transition, indigenous people's rights and traditional knowledge, so it can play to increase ambition. And there the interesting dimension is that in one way it goes both hands. Clearly, climate ambition is required to protect human rights, we all know, but the point that I make through the Talanoa Dialogue is that actually empowering, ensuring that communities are empowered and have an effective participation in decision making, making sure that policies are in place to promote a just transition, can be tools that actually even improve the quality of mitigation actions and adaptation actions. So even if we think only about the importance to reduce emissions and increase the resilience of societies, it's important not only to think about which sector of the economy can play a role, but civil society can bring in perspectives highlighting how actually equality, empowerment of women, protecting women's rights is one of the leverage that governments also have. And if we, as society, are able to integrate this in a convincing manner, really fitting into the questions that the Talanoa asks us, and specific thinking about how can we go to higher climate ambition, actually by using some of those leverage. We could also, in reframing how climate ambition is understood and promoted by the international process. In relation to this, just my final slide, and the facilitative dialogue is primarily understood from a mitigation perspective, but it's also important to, as you highlight the importance of other aspects of climate policy, and in particular adaptation, financial and technological support, capacity building, and our experiences on how those different policy tools help us go to where do we go, as the Fijian have framed it. So that's a great opportunity for us to make sure that the focus is not only on mitigation, but on other themes. And I think Marianne is going to address this in our final slide. Is just the tools to find the resources. The first one is the one that Marianne already mentioned, actually, the short guiding note on how civil society can provide input to the Talanoa Dialogue that was prepared by the friends of the Talanoa Dialogue. And the second note is the one that CL had, very much in line with the previous one, but maybe putting the focus a little bit more on how rights-related narratives and stories and experiences can also be provided in the context of the Talanoa Dialogue to make sure that we think about ambition includes the role of empowerment. For me.
Thank you much, Sebastien. That was very interesting to get those perspectives. And I think now we should open for some we get here issue discussion. Someone touch upon. There's an opportunity to raise your hand, and let me suggest that if anybody would like to intervene, ask a question, or come with a comment, then just introduce yourself and where you're based and your organization, so we know speaking. So it's open, Marianne. You.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to. There was one point that sometimes forget to talk about, but I think that is important for the Talanoa Dialogue and how we think about it, in particular when we are thinking national level work. And that is the Talanoa Dialogue ends in December. But for me, it's really also an opportunity to start this discussion on a national level. And if you look at it, 2019 and 2020, those 2 years will be much more focused on national climate ambition. So I think the Talanoa Dialogue is also an opportunity for us to bring this international negotiations to status where it translates more into national level discussions and actions and connecting the international with the national. So just to put that in terms as well, that even this is a 2018 process, it actually leads to much more national discussions in 2019, 2020.
So much for that active, Marianne. So you could look towards a perspective of a permanent Talanoa, an ongoing Talanoa, because we still need to move ahead on and along the way. Let's mention that at national level in Denmark, where we are based in small Denmark, civil society organizations, development, environmental NGOs were invited by Minister of Climate Change and Foreign Affairs to a discussion on how could we run Talanoa in Denmark, and we haven't any answers yet, but we have kind of the indication from the key players at ministry level that they would like to work with us in setting up some kind of a Talanoa dialogue events at national level. So from our end, we have started thinking of that. We haven't really got the answers yet, but just to mention that as one example, and if anybody else have indications that their governments or other actors in their societies are taking initiatives of that kind, then it would be very relevant to share so we can inspire each other. Wish to comment?
Just as a question.
So,
hello, Peter.
Who is speaking? Hello? I think it was you speaking. Present yourself to those who don't know you, because now.
Sure. Hi. Thank you for that wonderful presentation. My name is Navam. I'm based in Sri Lanka, and I'm working. I mentioned the Southern Voices project here on behalf of the Climate Action Network South Asia for Sri Lanka. And the question is, I mean, this is a fascinating concept, and I was just reading about it while you were talking about it as presenting it as well. I just have two questions. One question is, I'm curious to kind of to know what sort of mediums are used in these kind of discussions. You know, when it comes to sharing ideas and sharing knowledge, what sort of mediums? I mean, when it comes to imagery, stories, how to structure that. And my second question, I suppose this is also quite curious because, I mean, you mentioned that this is under the presidency of Fiji, and I have colleagues of mine who I had good meeting some people from Fiji, and I understood from them was that, the meat culture, it's a largely unfree society, and there is this kind of, there are tensions between the Indo-Fijians and the indigenous Fijians. When you have those kind of racial, ethnic, social, class-related tensions, how do you bridge that? because I understand the concept of sharing stories, but what are guidelines, if any, or stories you have of different communities coming together, overcoming those kind of limitations or those barriers? Thank you, and thank you for the amazing presentation. I certainly hope to read more about it. Thank you.
Hey, Peter, how you want to...
Yeah, please, who can answer that question? Is that you or Sebastien?
Maybe I can give it a... I'm sure Sebastien also has some thoughts on the community's questions. On the mediums and the imagery and all of that, I mean, I would rather see that as something that could be used on national and regional, particularly national level, and then I would really encourage people to use imagery in a frame of the culture that they would normally discuss things. You know, in Denmark, we probably wouldn't, I mean, we might sing a song at the beginning. That's something we do here quite a lot. You know, but in other cultural contexts, you might want to do something else. Yeah, so I think it's really dependent on what context you are in. At the UNFCCC, I cannot imagine that that the inputs will be very different from what you would normally put into a UNFCCC submission. On different communities and guidelines for that, I do think that I have a lot of input on that because, again, that's a very national context. In principle, I mean, the way we have perceived the Talanoa Dialogue and the way it has been communicated to us from the Fijian, it really is supposed to include all stakeholders. How you then bridge the tensions that you also mentioned, that should put, I mean, in principle, that should be overcome by including all stakeholders.
Let me suggest, Catherine, do you have a reflect on this, because you can with the indigenous peoples groups who are often minority group in the national society, how do you consider contributing to this in a national context in countries where you're working?
Oh, I was hoping someone would answer this very difficult question. Well, I think I agree very much with Marianne that it's very country context and therefore a bit difficult to reply. I haven't really been discussing Talanoa Dialogue with people at the national level on how they are getting engaged, but I guess it really very much depends on how a dialogue is already in place. I mean, I would expect, I mean, when it comes to indigenous peoples, you have countries that have not even recognized that there are indigenous peoples in their countries. So, to be honest, I don't expect this to change from one day to another just because there is a Talanoa Dialogue. So, I guess it's very different country contexts, but I guess it could be an opportunity to get in contact or to reach out to different stakeholders and to use this as an opportunity to start talking about climate change and contributions to increasing ambitions and abilities on the ground, etc. But I can't really give you a better answer than that, I think.
Yeah.
Maybe Sebastien knows more.
Can you actually, Sebastien, or?
No, to add, I think important to see that Talanoa Dialogue is doing two things. One, it creates a new process at the international level that's more inclusive than what is usually done, and gives us an opportunity to provide input on part governments as long as we are able to really think to the methodology that was highlighted by Marianne. And then second, it provides an opportunity for anyone, both like governments, and it's great to hear that Denmark has looking into this, but also for just anyone to try to use these brands, more or less this label, and try to organize, facilitate something at front level, whether it's national or regional, to a conversation, a multi-stakeholder conversation on climate ambition. But then it's not going to be a silver bullet. There are social tension in the country, or so yeah, I don't expect that that's going necessarily to help a lot in existing challenges between communities. We are expecting the Fijian presidency to prepare a short YouTube video highlighting, as a tutorial, highlighting how Talanoa is done in the Pacific. So hopefully there will be soon, and before the May session, some kind of guidance on how actually Pacific leaders are trying to have those based on mutual understanding and storytelling rather than traditional negotiation.
Sebastien, I don't see any other hands wishing to speak, so let me ask you a question. I was very pleased to see how you indicated that the different pieces in the puzzle are all relevant. In the slide here where you are saying mitigation and adaptation and technical and financial support, you can talk ambition in all three areas, and they fit together. But let me ask you then, how could you then, to take example, how could link climate ambition with land tenure rights, just to get, because that's what we are discussing at present in because we've been working with a lot of organizations working with on land rights issues, and now we have decided to scale up our work on climate change. But very often the organizations working on land issues, climate is not part of their perspective. That's not what they're fighting for. So we are sort of looking at how can you push those issues, and this is just to take an example from our own small world, but I think it's more general. How can you sort of bridge those distinct issues to climate ambition?
On land tenure, it's actually one of the easiest ones on that slide. There are studies that demonstrate that actually if you want to protect forests or carbon stored in soil, done by empowering communities, protecting land tenure rights, protecting the rights of indigenous peoples, than in places where those rights are not protected. So it's just, there are studies that highlight that actually protecting rights is not only important for the communities themselves, but it actually increases the capacity to reduce emissions or to protect carbon stocks. And so I think this is a great opportunity to share this message. There are climate negotiators or decision makers that are extremely narrow-minded and only focus on something is going to help cut emissions more rapidly or not. And here we have an opportunity to make the case that really, even for people who don't really see indigenous rights or land tenure rights or gender empowerment women as part of their mandate or their field of activity, in the tools we have to combat climate change can help us actually reach additional ambition. So that's why I focused this particular slide on those different topics. And I can say we are trying to draft a written submission to the Talanoa Dialogue for the April 2nd deadline, specifically on this slide actually. So I'll be happy to share it with anyone interested, to even get any of you involved, whether it's by your input or by asking for your sign-on to be making the point that are beneficial for effective climate action.
Okay, thank you very much. I got to ask Catherine to present herself. You're working with the International Working Group for Indigenous Affairs at the Secretariat in Copenhagen. So that's how I come to know you.
Yes, exactly. Can I just add something to what Sebastien said, the land tenure rights issues? I think one of the very important issues is also that if you do not respect land tenure, if you don't respect land rights, you actually have a higher risk for ambitious climate mitigation projects not to succeed. Because if you get into if you, for example, have a windmill project or you have a hydroelectric dam project or whatever, and you not respect the rights of the indigenous peoples, the communities in the area, you have a higher risk of projects not succeeding. So I think that's also a very important element of land tenure rights issues.
Okay, much, Catherine. We only have 10 minutes left of the scheduled time. So it's your chance to ask a question and to ask clarification or to make a contribution. Please, who?
Peter.
Yes, hi.
This is Grace. Yeah. Thank you much for the presentation, and I really like the discussions going, especially with regards to women empowerment when it comes to issues of climate change. I just want to add that we should also look at how to advocate for the inclusion of the private sector into discussions that are ongoing. Because when when she was presenting on the messengers, I saw, a lot of concentration on the public sector, civil society, faith-based organizations, but I didn't see the private sector. In Ghana, the Ministry of Environment, Science and Technology is doing a lot of lobbying to bring on board the private sector, and they've been able to get the head of the platform of private sector onto the NDC committee, steering committee, the readiness for the NDC committee. So he's part of the steering committee. I believe that bringing the private sector on board gives them a sense of consciousness when the NDC begins to roll out in the various countries. So I think that there's a need for us to also advocacy and concentrate on getting on board the private sector with regards to the NDCs as well.
Thanks. And that was from Grace, Abantu for Development in Ghana. I see a question in the chat here from Fiona Wright, since you're not on the join the web. So your question is about the pre-2020 action. That's also an element in the mandate. What's the perspective or including issues relating to that? Or to elaborate the question, Fiona, yourself?
I can't hear Fiona. The question of where are we, which is part of the Talanoa Dialogue, is basically the one where you can address pre-2020 actions. And in general, the whole pre-2020 discussion is important to have an overall successful Talanoa Dialogue, I believe. If we don't respond to that question properly, then there is also a risk that the other questions will not be addressed properly.
The other questions bring to that? Sebastien or Marianne, do you have a reply to the pre-2020 question?
Hey, Peter, this is Marianne. Do you hear me?
Yes, I hear you.
I heard my response.
No.
No. Okay. Maybe I didn't unmute. No, the response was basically saying that in the Talanoa Dialogue, the whole question of where are we relates to the pre-2020 discussion as well. And I agree with Fiona that it's really important to address that question, to have an overall successful Talanoa dialogue. I guess, I mean, yeah. So, where are we? That also relates to the pre-2020. You can highlight the question or the need for increased implementation of climate action. That is already happening. Yeah.
Thank you. I've got a question relating to when you go this platform on the web, on the Talanoa Dialogue, they have to decide whether you make your contribution or submission in either of the three categories. So you are supposed to either select where are we, or select where do we want to be, or select how do we get there. And sometimes it's a bit of a challenge to make this decision, because your idea about how to get there is related to where we want to go and where we are now. So I saw that some actually who already now submitted some input, they put in all three categories, and then I guess it's up to the editors to find out how to deal with it. But any idea and advice on that?
No, you can submit it. Either you can click several boxes, or you can submit it several times. But shouldn't feel like you need to address only one of the questions. I think actually Fiji will welcome very much input to each three questions, knowing that the third one is clearly the one that's the most politically relevant. I think it makes the most sense if you put yourself in the shoes of a small Fijian team that has to compile all of the input in 3 weeks to prepare reports. The most important is really to flag in your headings which one of the questions you're addressing. And if you make clear, then you address all three, and hope that Fiji really picks your inputs for all of the three questions.
Okay, thank you. There's myself another question is that its concept, and it's slowly building up this idea about having national dialogues, and it takes a time to organize and how can you actually do it. And then if you look at the time frame, it's probably going to happen only quite late in the process. So then you not able to contribute to the first part of the process if we're looking at the time here. So the opportunity to influence this political phase towards the end of December, and what is the kind of out phase which we expect will, and how we feed into the formal negotiation process? What are expectations on? Can anybody? I have an answer in the chat box from Sebastien. He's typing that you can probably provide some initial input early on for the first deadline, and then follow up with a national dialogue. But the question will be, when you follow up with a national dialogue, how will the national dialogue then be able to feed into the police during COP24? Any proposal on that?
Sorry, I just had to go in a nice place, but I would say two ways to feed in what you discuss at the national level. The first one is that you provide the report of that dialogue in a very concise manner by the second deadline of the Talanoa Dialogue. There's no limit that would prevent you from providing one report for each of the deadlines. And the second way is that governments are supposed to come at the political phase with proposals and stories to share and their own commitments to increase ambition, hopefully. So we also try to influence your government so that the outcomes of the national dialogue are reflected in their direct contributions to this political phase, even if we won't have a seat at the table.
Well, thank you very much to everybody. We are nearing the end of the call. Thanks for the two excellent presentations, and thanks to all those who listened, and we hope you will engage in the Talanoa Dialogue and contribute your perspective from your different civil society organizations, and hopefully we will meet sometimes along the way. As the output of this call, we will share the recording and maybe a set of notes, and of course the slides from the call. So in case you didn't already register, we will share with those registered with
QP.
And if you didn't register with Jenny, send your information, so we will share this material after the call.
Okay, we'll do that, Peter. I will send information to Jenny. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Peter. Bye.
Bye bye.
Thank you.